Hey guys, tonight we're entering a world far darker and smellier than any haunted castle or pirate ship. I'm talking about Victorian public bathrooms, the kind of places so foul, so infamous, they could give modern gas station rest stops a run for their money. Forget everything you know about scented candles and flushable wipes. This is a time when toilets were an experiment. Plumbing was mostly wishful thinking, and a public trip to the loo was more like an act of civil disobedience. So before you settle in, take a moment to like and subscribe. But only if you actually enjoy what I do here. Leave a comment telling me where you are listening from and what time it is for you. Now, dim your lights, put on that white noise fan, get comfortable, and gently prepare your nostrils for imaginary horrors. Maybe pull your blanket up a little higher. Victorian rats were legendary. Let's pause for a moment. Have you ever wondered what it was like to really need a bathroom break in 1852 London? What exactly happened in a public loo before hand sanitizer was a thing? Did people ever not step in something mysterious? Was there actually a line for the ladies, or did everyone just sprint and hope for the best? Did anyone clean these places? Or did the city just surrender? Would you trust a public toilet attendant with a waxed mustache and a bucket? And what in the world was a necessary house? And why did it sound so ominous? Congratulations, you've just woken up on a foggy London morning. It's 1858. The Thames smells like regret. Your bladder is full, and you have exactly 1 penny to your name. Good luck. You've just had 2 cups of questionable tea and the urge hits. But where exactly does a decent Victorian relieve themselves when home is miles away? Welcome to the ultimate endurance sport. Holding it until your dignity or your internal organs give out. Let's set the scene. You're striding down a bustling London street in your stiffest trousers or most unwieldy crinoline, feeling sophisticated, modern, and perhaps a little too hydrated. The city is alive with the clatter of horse-drawn carriages, the shouting of street vendors, and somewhere in the distance, the muffled roar of the Thames reminding you that nature's call cannot be ignored forever. At first, you're confident. After all, you're a Victorian. You endure hardship for fun. But as you turn down yet another cobblestone lane lined with suspicious puddles and suspiciously unsympathetic passers-by, the reality sets in. Public bathrooms are as rare as sincere politicians. You scan for anything that looks remotely like a public convenience, perhaps a necessary house, a pay-per-view palace, or even a secluded alley. Instead, you find a parade of closed doors, no admittance signs, and the ever-watchful eyes of society's finest, ready to judge you for even contemplating an unscheduled detour. If you're a man, you might spot the glint of a cast-iron urinal somewhere in the distance, usually positioned in a way that guarantees you'll make awkward eye contact with your supervisor, your grocer, and at least one distant relative. If you're a woman, well, congratulations, you've just unlocked hard mode. There are entire government reports debating whether ladies are trustworthy enough to use a public loo without collapsing society's moral foundation. The handful of ladies' conveniences that do exist are buried in back alleys, guarded by matronly attendants, or permanently out of order. Your only real option? Wait. Or risk the shame of being the subject of next week's editorial in the Times. Mysterious woman spotted running. The clock ticks. Your need becomes a presence. You develop the Victorian waddle, a brisk but suspiciously careful walk, knees pressed decorously together, the sort of gait that would have baffled Darwin himself. You try to distract yourself with the news. You try to count how many different varieties of horse droppings you can spot. You attempt advanced psychological warfare. Maybe I don't need to go after all. Maybe this is just a passing sensation. Maybe, oh no, the desperation builds. You consider every possible alternative. Is that an open carriage house? Or just someone's living room? Could you blend in with the street urchins and use a handy alley? Or will that get you a stern lecture and a fine? Victorian London is not kind to public relief seekers. There are rules. There are eyes everywhere. There is, frankly, not enough urban foliage to go around. Somewhere around minute 22, you spot salvation, a public toilet. It's attended by a man with a walrus moustache, costs a penny, and there's a line stretching halfway to Birmingham. You fish out your penny, only to realize you spent it on a meat pie 2 hours ago, and the attendant is not in the mood to barter. You contemplate fate, destiny, and whether the universe is fundamentally cruel. Eventually, most Victorians simply learn to plan their entire day around proximity to a reliable bathroom. Preferably at home, preferably alone, preferably with a door that locks. Day trips require the foresight of a chess grandmaster and the bladder control of a camel. You leave parties early, refuse extra tea, and develop the sixth sense for which friends have the best connections and the least judgmental staff. And so you endure. You cross your legs, cross your fingers, and keep walking, hoping the city's next great innovation will involve more bathrooms and fewer moral panics. The Great Victorian Bladder Challenge is not about victory. It's about survival. And if you make it home in time, you win the only prize that matters. Sweet, sweet relief and a newfound respect for indoor plumbing. Let's talk infrastructure, or more accurately, let's talk about the gaping, soul-crushing lack of it. In Victorian London, public toilets are less a convenience and more an urban legend, whispered about by desperate souls but rarely sighted in the wild. The city itself, exploding with people, factories, and tea-drinking rituals, has managed to invent steam trains and telegraphs, but can't quite figure out where everyone should go when nature calls. You are a modern human, used to the idea that even the grimmiest gas station will, eventually, reveal a functional restroom after a short, awkward negotiation with a key attached to a hubcap. But now, you're in 1850. The population is swelling, the Thames is swelling, and so is your bladder. You look for a sign, any sign, that relief is near. Instead, you get a first-hand look at the city's real facilities, alleyways, corners, and, if you're particularly unlucky, the fetid banks of the river itself. The streets are alive with noise, horses, and an undercurrent of quiet collective suffering. Why so grim? Because before public toilets, there was holding it. And after that, there was still holding it. The earliest attempts at public bathrooms in London look suspiciously like medieval torture chambers. The necessary house was a wooden hut, barely large enough for a single person, and almost never positioned anywhere you actually needed it. Lined up in dark alleys, often without doors or with doors that didn't lock, they were a haven for every manner of vermin, mystery liquids, and existential dread. The only thing separating you from public humiliation was a thin plank, and the hope that your enemies weren't passing by. And don't get too comfortable with the idea that these toilets were free. Enter the penny toilet, the world's first paywall for basic dignity. If you're lucky enough to have the right coin, you can enjoy the privilege of squatting over a wooden hole and praying for minimal splashback. If not, it's back to square one. For the city's countless poor and children, even a single penny was a luxury, so the streets remained aromatic. Worse still, every advance in toilet technology was met with a tidal wave of suspicion, newspaper editorials, and government debates about the morality of encouraging public indecency by making it too easy to go. There were arguments about whether toilets would attract the wrong kind of crowd, damage property values, or inspire a new generation of hooligans who relieved themselves for sport. City planners designed grand visions of public sanitation, then promptly underfunded every last project, ensuring the only real progress was in building more polite ways to complain. For women, the situation was even bleaker. There simply weren't facilities. The idea that women might need to relieve themselves outside the home was met with disbelief and occasional pearl clutching. Even when public ladies' toilets started appearing, they were hidden away, difficult to access, or reserved for respectable women only, which, in practice, meant anyone whose social status could be verified on the spot. Everyone else? Good luck. Many women planned their days around not needing the bathroom at all, mastering the art of thirst denial. By the mid-Victorian era, the filth and frustration reached a breaking point. Enter the Great Stink and the rise of men like Joseph Bazalgette, who looked at the situation and thought, surely we can do better than open sewers and pay per squat. But for most Londoners, progress arrived at the pace of government paperwork, slow, baffling, and never in the right place at the right time. And so, public toilets in Victorian London became less a place and more an idea, an aspiration, a rumour, a beacon of hope on a very distant, very fragrant horizon. They call them necessary houses because, well, there's no better word for it. Imagine a wooden shack in an alley, with a hole, a smell, and a line of desperate Londoners. That's progress. Victorian style. But what exactly is a necessary house? And why did they multiply like pigeons on a foggy morning? Let's back up. In the early 19th century, the city's population boomed, and with every new tenement and row house came an inconvenient truth. People, it turned out, needed somewhere to go. Chamber pots could only handle so much, and the streets were already performing acrobatics under the weight of animal and human waste. Enter the necessary house, an optimistic name for a bleak reality. You, the hapless Victorian with an urgent need, are scanning your surroundings. At last you spot a sign. Public convenience, congratulations. You have found a necessary house, tucked between two buildings, camouflaged by the strategic placement of a very apologetic tree. The building is more suggestion than structure. Wood planks warped by damp, a door with the integrity of a wet biscuit, and, if you're lucky, a rusty latch. Inside, you're met with the kind of smell that can't be described, only survived. It's the aroma of centuries, a living record of every desperate soul who came before you, layered like the rings of a particularly tragic tree. The floor may or may not be there. The seat is a slab of wood, perched over a dark hole whose depth you do not wish to consider. There is no light, unless you count the faint glow from a cracked pane or the reflected despair in your own eyes. Privacy is theoretical. Planks are spaced just wide enough for a pair of curious eyes or the wind to whistle through, reminding you that humility is a virtue, but for all their faults, necessary houses were a revelation compared to what came before. In earlier centuries, Londoners made do with privy pits in their backyards, or, more often, simply chose the most convenient corner of the nearest alley. If you lived near the Thames, your problems were solved, provided you didn't mind being downriver from everyone else's solution. By the 1840s, however, disease outbreaks and an alarming rise in public nuisance complaints forced the city to act. The necessary house was the government's first admission that, yes, people must go, and no, we can't just keep pretending they don't. Still, these facilities were not democratic. Most were built in working-class districts, where crowded families shared a single outdoor privy between dozens. In some neighbourhoods, the ratio of people to privies was so extreme that entire blocks functioned on a tight go quickly or forever hold your peace rotation. For the poor, the necessary house was both a blessing and a curse. A break from chamber pots, but an assault on the senses and dignity. If you were lucky enough to live in a wealthier part of town, your necessary house might even have a door that closed. The real upper crust, of course, looked down on these public conveniences from the comfort of their own water closets, an innovation still regarded with suspicion by anyone who thought the plumbing might lead to a fate worse than embarrassment. And yet, as revolting as they were, necessary houses became an everyday part of Victorian life. They inspired poetry, graffiti, and endless complaint. People gossiped in line, swapped news, and occasionally used them for illicit business. Proof that even misery can be communal. In a city bursting at the seams, the necessary house was a grim monument to progress. Not elegant, never pleasant, but, in the end, utterly, well, necessary. Congratulations, you've found a public loo. It only costs a penny, a small fortune if you're a child, a servant, or anyone who's spent all day just trying to make enough for supper. Sometimes the line is longer than the wait for a cab in the rain. Let's set the scene. You're clutching your last coin, shifting uncomfortably as the queue snakes out the door and along the busy street. The air is thick with anticipation, desperation, and the faint hope that this time, just maybe, the attendant will actually mop the floor. Welcome to the Victorian penny pay toilet, the greatest social equalizer since the plague. One coin gets you access to London's newest innovation in public hygiene, a wooden stall, a door that might lock, and a chance to avoid humiliation on the open pavement. But who thought of charging people to use a bathroom, and why did everyone just go along with it? As with all great Victorian ideas, it began with a combination of optimism, bureaucracy, and a very real problem with people relieving themselves wherever the urge struck. The city fathers decided the solution wasn't more toilets, but better ones, better meaning more exclusive, more supervised, and slightly less likely to collapse. And what better way to keep things respectable than by putting a price on privacy? At the grand opening of the first pay toilet, London's newspapers declared a new era of cleanliness. Dignitaries lined up to ceremoniously drop their pennies in the slot, no doubt hoping their names would be forever associated with progress rather than plumbing. The public was less convinced. To the city's working poor, a penny was dinner, a pint, or a rare night at the music hall. For many, it was simply too much. And yet, the prospect of not having to brave a filthy alley or a necessary house full of strangers was enough to make even the most frugal Londoner part with their hard-earned coin. Inside, the experience was marginally better. The penny paid for an attendant who hovered near the door with the air of a nightclub bouncer and a mop that saw more action as a prop than a cleaning tool. You might be handed a rag, or, in the fancier establishments, a square of newspaper for wiping purposes. Progress in the form of recycled headlines. The space was small, the lighting dim, and the sense of urgency palpable. Nobody lingered in the penny toilet. Time was money, and so was every second you delayed the next person in line. Children were the true casualties of the pay toilet revolution. If you were young, poor, or simply unlucky, you learned to strategize, wait until you got home, sneak into the bushes, or perfect the art of looking innocent in a crowded city. Petty theft and creative entry became common. Some children pooled their pennies for group visits, sneaking in 2 at a time. Others became master distractors, slipping past the attendant while a friend staged a dramatic feint or accidentally knocked over the mop bucket. The penny toilet, meant to instill order, instead created a generation of tiny outlaws. For women, the price was double. First, you had to find a ladies' pay toilet, which was almost never conveniently located. And then you had to pay extra for the privilege. If you couldn't, well, society offered no alternative except the impossible: hold it or risk scandal. No wonder so many Victorian women developed iron bladders and a deep suspicion of urban planners. By the end of the century, pay toilets were everywhere, symbols of both civic pride and relentless penny pinching. They taught a whole city the true value of a coin and the lengths people will go to avoid embarrassment. Progress, it seems, always comes with a cover charge. Meet your new best friend, the toilet attendant. They wield a mop like a weapon, wear a uniform with alarming stains, and collect pennies with a suspiciously sticky hand. Are they cleaning or just moving the filth around in circles? Step inside any Victorian pay toilet, and you'll find the attendant perched on a stool by the entrance, surveying the crowd with the stern gaze of a prison warden and the world weariness of someone who has seen too much. Their main tools are a battered mop, a dented bucket, and a mysterious pile of rags, the provenance of which you absolutely do not want to know. For a penny, you are granted access to a stall, the dubious protection of a wooden door, and the comforting illusion that this place is, in some sense, clean. The attendant's job is simple, in theory. Keep the toilet respectable, keep the line moving, and make sure nobody uses the facilities without paying. In practice, they function as bouncer, cashier, and amateur sociologist. Every day, they referee squabbles over queue jumping, break up hushed arguments about who owes whom a penny, and, on rare occasions, escort out the kind of customer who mistakes public convenience for free lodging. Some attendants embrace the power, brandishing their mop with the confidence of a knight defending the Holy Grail. Others look defeated, as if the mop has conquered them and is now in charge. Let's discuss cleanliness, or rather, the performance of it. At the start of the day, the attendant gives the floor a hopeful sweep, waving the rag in the air like a flag of surrender. They splash a little water, scented with whatever cheap disinfectant is available, and, if feeling ambitious, open a window, letting in the air of London, which is only a marginal improvement. After that, the routine consists mostly of moving puddles from one corner to another, shuffling dirt under the stall doors, and occasionally muttering prayers that no one inspects the corners too closely. Supplies are basic. The rag, usually damp, always mysterious. The bucket, never entirely empty. And, for special occasions, a battered tin of lye. Toilet paper is a luxury, so the attendant doles out torn scraps of newspaper or rough-cut squares of catalogues, both of which double as reading material and, if necessary, emergency insulation. Every so often, they'll give the seat a brisk wipe and flash a weary smile that says, "There, it's clean enough." If you ask for anything more, you'll get a look that can curdle milk. For many Victorians, the presence of an attendant is both a comfort and a social anxiety trigger. You want to seem polite, but not too needy. You tip your cap, murmur thank you, and try not to imagine where their hands have been. The attendant, for their part, has seen it all: sneaky non-payers, people attempting to use the facilities for illicit purposes, and those who emerge from the stall looking as if they've just faced an existential crisis. Small talk is optional, but the best attendants are masters of the art. With a single eyebrow raise, they can communicate everything from "don't even think about it" to "you call that washing your hands?" Behind the scenes, attendants wage a never-ending battle against entropy. By evening, their mop is frayed. Their rags are more philosophy than fabric, and their sense of hope is clinging by a single thread. Yet, somehow, they keep the show running. In the end, the real miracle isn't cleanliness. It's the collective agreement to pretend, just for a penny, that everything is under control. Gentlemen's facilities are bad. The options for women are worse. If you're a lady, public bathrooms are more myth than reality. Hope you brought a friend to stand guard, or a bladder of steel. Let's rewind to a typical London morning, 1872. You're a woman of the city, maybe middle class, maybe working class, maybe out shopping, or even laboring in a nearby factory. Either way, you're drinking tea, minding your own business, and suddenly realize you need the bathroom. Panic sets in, not because you're in a hurry, but because Victorian society has made going in public nearly impossible for women. Most public toilets are built for men, rows of urinals, pissoirs, and privies with little thought for female anatomy or, honestly, female existence. You ask a shopkeeper if there's a restroom. They give you a look that says, "This is a decent establishment, madam." Translation: absolutely not. You consider a quick trip home, but your house is an hour away, and your crinoline isn't made for speed. There's a public necessary house a few streets over, but rumour has it the attendant is a retired prison guard. The line is never shorter than an opera intermission, and half the stalls don't have doors. Good luck. Why so few ladies' conveniences? It wasn't just oversight, it was ideology. Victorian society believed women shouldn't need to relieve themselves away from home, as if biology and social decency were perfectly in sync. Modesty was the explanation, which meant that any woman found searching for a public toilet was obviously up to no good. The moral guardians of the city, mostly men, debated, at length, whether public loos for women would bring about social collapse. Some argued that easy access to toilets would encourage immoral wandering or, worse, make women feel too comfortable leaving the house. For working women, the situation was dire. Female factory workers endured 10-hour shifts, sometimes with only a single privy at the far end of the yard, shared with 100 others, and often closed for repairs. Servants, couriers, governesses, and maids developed the iron willpower of Zen monks. Many simply drank less, creating a nation of perpetually dehydrated women with nervous, darting eyes and suspiciously small handbags. On the rare occasion you did find a lady's public convenience, it was usually hidden away, marked discreetly, or located at the end of a maze of corridors behind a locked door. Entry required a secret knock, a tip to the attendant, or, if you were unlucky, a permission slip from a local matron. Inside, there was little comfort, cramped stalls, the inevitable smell, and the constant fear that some passing gentleman might barge in by accident. If the penny toilet for men was inconvenient, the penny toilet for women was a logistical nightmare. Of course, not all women suffered equally. If you were wealthy, you had options: elaborate water closets in your own home, or a private retiring room at the theatre, complete with an attendant, a chaise longue, and enough potpourri to stun a horse. Middle and working class women, meanwhile, mastered the art of holding it. A silent, daily struggle that rarely made the history books but shaped entire routines. The result? Women spent less time outside, planned their journeys with the precision of military campaigns, and bonded with friends over whispered advice on which shops might look the other way if you pleaded your case. By the end of the Victorian era, suffragettes and social reformers began to raise their voices. If men could pee in peace, why not women? Their campaigns were met with scandalized headlines and pearl-clutching outrage, but slowly, change crept in, one timid lady's lavatory at a time. If you ever doubted the courage of Victorian women, just remember, they survived history's longest bathroom line with dignity and a suspiciously brisk walk. Let's step up to the pissoir, a cast-iron monument to public exposure. No walls, no privacy, and a guarantee you'll make eye contact with someone you know. Victorian men, this was your lot. Imagine yourself as a proper Victorian gentleman out for a stroll. Maybe you're wearing your best hat. Maybe you're only pretending it's not raining. But eventually, after too much tea or a dodgy pint, nature knocks on the door. If you're lucky, you don't have to brave a necessary house or fork over a precious penny. Instead, you join the throngs of men at London's latest innovation, the street urinal. The urinals, or pissoirs if you're feeling fancy, sprouted up on city corners, outside busy railway stations, and anywhere crowds of men might be seized by sudden urgency. They were made of wrought iron, painted a colour that did nothing to hide rust stains or graffiti, and thoughtfully installed in highly visible places. Privacy? The Victorians were firm believers in humility, but when it came to street urinals, the best you could hope for was a waist-high barrier and a polite cough if someone looked your way. There was no mistaking the experience. The air around the pissoir was always lively, a blend of city smog, overripe onions, and the scent of regret. The ground was permanently damp, and, depending on the time of day, you might find yourself in the company of office clerks, cab drivers, drunks, and that one neighbour you desperately try to avoid. Conversation was, of course, frowned upon. The official etiquette: stare straight ahead, do not linger, and under no circumstances comment on the weather. If you must nod, keep it brief and solemn, as if attending a funeral for modesty itself. For city officials, the street urinal was a triumph of public health and order. Before their arrival, men relieved themselves wherever the spirit moved them, against buildings, in alleys, and, on more than one occasion, into the Thames. The result? Chaos, complaints, and the distinctive aroma that made Victorian summers so memorable. The pissoir was supposed to civilize the city, corral male necessity into a cast-iron corral. It mostly worked, if you ignored the smell and the awkwardness. Of course, not everyone was pleased. Moralists warned that street urinals would debase the city's character and encourage loafing, as if anyone was using the pissoir for recreation. Local shopkeepers grumbled about the constant foot traffic and the sight of men buttoning up outside their window displays. Satirical newspapers printed cartoons of shocked ladies shielding their eyes while men in top hats queued up in broad daylight. But for most Londoners, the sight quickly became part of the urban landscape. Like fog, horse manure, or the eternal sound of distant coughing, tourists were always shocked. Is that in public? They'd gasp, scandalized, as a queue of businessmen calmly waited their turn. The locals just shrugged. If you wanted privacy, you went home. If you wanted efficiency, you joined the public pee parade and hoped your hat stayed dry. Street urinals weren't just practical, they were a social leveler. Dukes and dock workers alike, forced to rub elbows, though ideally nothing else, in their hour of need. There was no velvet rope, no special privilege. Just a line, a brief, undignified moment, and a shared understanding. Sometimes, the city is bigger than your embarrassment. In the grand scheme of Victorian life, the pissoir was proof that public necessity can triumph over public shame. So next time you grumble about a modern restroom line, spare a thought for those who did their business on Main Street, in full view, and lived to tell the tale. At home, it's chamber pots under the bed, emptied with a shudder and a prayer. One wrong step in the dark, and you're closer to history than you ever wanted to be. Let's step into your average Victorian bedroom, candle guttering on the nightstand, shadows dancing across peeling wallpaper, and somewhere under the bed, lurking, silent, uncomfortably full, is the humble chamber pot. It's the unsung hero of the household, present in every class, every bedroom, every sleepless night. If you wake up at 2 a.m. with the desperate need to go, you have three choices. fumble for your slippers and risk the freezing, rat-haunted journey to the necessary house outside. Hold it, develop a kidney stone, and add a tragic footnote to the family Bible. Or, like most sensible Victorians, reach under the bed and pray your aim is true. Chamber pots were not glamorous. Some were porcelain with delicate floral patterns. A desperate attempt to pretend what was inside them was somehow less offensive. Others were tin, earthenware, or whatever the landlord had left behind. There were pots for children, chamber pots for adults, and even special commode chairs for the elderly and wealthy. Essentially an armchair with a secret no one talked about. The nightly ritual was always the same. Wake up, curse the lack of indoor plumbing, shuffle to the edge of the mattress, and grope around blindly for the pot. The bravest among you do this without lighting a candle, relying on the power of touch, memory, and reckless optimism. Everyone else risks waking the household with a stubbed toe and a muttered oath. Silence is golden, except when you're pouring into porcelain and everyone can hear exactly how much tea you had before bed. And then comes the morning. Whoever wakes first, mother, servant, or the unluckiest member of the family, becomes the designated chamber pot emptier. Their job is simple in theory. Pick up the pot, hold it at arm's length, and navigate a treacherous path to the privy or the street. In nicer homes, this task falls to the maid, whose life is a never-ending cycle of things that should have been invented out of existence. In poorer households, everyone takes turns, which is fair only if you ignore the laws of probability and sibling rivalry. Disposal is a grim business. The contents are dumped into the backyard cesspit, the privy, or, if you're feeling especially medieval, straight out the window. In the city, you're legally required to shout "Gardez l'eau." Translation: look out for the water. Before tossing, did people always remember? Let's just say the sudden rain showers of Victorian London were not always meteorological in origin. One unlucky slip, a poorly balanced pot, and someone's day or outfit would be ruined before sunrise. Despite the embarrassment, chamber pots were essential. The alternative was worse: braving icy winds, prowling cats, and the mysterious darkness of Victorian gardens. Besides, everyone used them. Even the Queen had one. Hers was gold, but still served the same royal purpose. They were also oddly social. Couples compared designs, children named them, and artists painted charming scenes on the outside, as if aesthetics could mask reality. Eventually, indoor plumbing arrived, and the chamber pot faded into nostalgia, thrift shops, and the odd horror film. But for most Victorians, it was a nightly lifeline, a symbol of human ingenuity, stubbornness, and the eternal hope that you wouldn't spill it on your own foot. So next time you take a midnight stroll to your well-lit, heated bathroom, remember, your ancestors did the shuffle so you could walk tall. Every night, armies of night soil men descend upon the city, scooping up the day's leavings with a bucket and a song. The smell could knock out a horse, but someone's got to do it. If you ever wondered what happened to all those chamber pots, privies, and cesspits once they'd reached capacity, here's your answer. Enter the night soil men, London's most misunderstood working-class heroes. By day, they blended into the city, anonymous as cobblestones. But after dark, they became the backbone of Victorian sanitation, or, depending on your nose, the city's most aromatic menace. Let's paint the scene. It's 2 a.m., the streets are quiet, the fog hangs thick, and from the darkness emerges a procession of men wielding shovels, barrels, and an ironclad sense of resignation. Their job? Emptying cesspits and collecting the night soil, the polite term for everything people would rather not think about again. This was not work for the faint of heart or sensitive of stomach. The pay wasn't great, but it was better than starving. And, oddly enough, the profession was often handed down through generations. Imagine the family business talk. "Someday, son, all this will be yours," said while gesturing to a sea of human waste. The work was filthy, exhausting, and surprisingly complex. Night soil men had to navigate narrow alleys, unlock backyard gates, and lower themselves into brick-lined pits that hadn't seen sunlight in decades. Sometimes they worked by candlelight, sometimes by memory, always by smell. The bravest among them climbed right down into the pit, filling buckets and hauling them back up by rope. It was a team sport. One man shoveling, another tipping the barrel, a third keeping watch for any nosy neighbors, or worse, the authorities, in case a job was done outside the official schedule. Once the barrels were filled, the night soil men wheeled them through the streets, trying not to spill a feat as difficult as it sounds, heading for collection depots on the city's edge. Here, the contents were loaded onto carts and shipped out to the countryside, where London's waste became someone else's fertilizer. If you ate suspiciously robust carrots in the Victorian era, well, now you know their secret. Night soil even had value, though nobody boasted about it. It was bought and sold, a hidden part of the city's economy, though no one ever included night soil in polite dinner conversation. The job had its hazards: cave-ins, collapses, and the ever-present danger of falling into a pit and never being seen again. Some men wore special boots or waxed their mustaches to block out the smell. Others simply accepted that, no matter how many times they bathed, they would never be quite welcome in polite society. The smell lingered. The reputation lingered longer. And the jokes lingered longest of all. Despite all this, the night soil men were essential. Without them, London would have drowned in its own filth, and, for a while, almost did. They were the invisible engines of public health, the reason outbreaks of cholera or typhus didn't happen more often. People cursed them, mocked them, and avoided them. But deep down, everyone was grateful for their nightly sacrifice. So, the next time you grumble about modern garbage pickup, remember the night soil men. They took the city's worst, made it their nightly bread, and marched off into the dawn, leaving London just a little bit cleaner and themselves a little bit dirtier for their trouble. Why does the whole city reek in summer? Because, dear listener, most of what you flush ends up in the Thames, and so do you, if you get too close to the edge during a bathroom emergency. Let's picture the Thames as it truly was in Victorian London. Not the postcard river of royal regattas and romantic fog, but a living, bubbling monument to centuries of public health denial. To the modern eye, a river running through the heart of a metropolis seems like a blessing. For Victorian Londoners, it was a curse, one that came with a smell so potent it could be weaponized. For centuries, the Thames was London's everything: water source, transportation route, garbage dump, and, most importantly, the city's unofficial sewer. Every time a chamber pot was dumped, a Privy overflowed, or a rainstorm swept through filthy streets, the contents found their way to the river, out of sight, out of mind, until the wind shifted, and suddenly everyone's mind was very much on it. The riverbanks were lined with necessary houses, their contents dropping straight into the water with a musical splash. Factories poured out chemical waste. Slaughterhouses let blood and animal bits join the party. Dead dogs, expired cats, old shoes, rotting vegetables, and even the occasional floating mystery. If it fit through a drain or over a ledge, it became part of the river's legacy. The Thames didn't discriminate. All were welcome. The only qualification was that you didn't want it anymore. On warm summer days, when the sun finally fought through the London smog, the Thames answered by simmering gently and exhaling a perfume unlike any other. The great stink of 1858 became legendary. Members of Parliament had to douse the windows of Westminster with chlorine, soaked sheets, and anyone with means left town for the healthier countryside, which, to be fair, was only marginally less pungent. The newspapers published charts tracking the spread of the smell, as if it were a weather system or an invading army. For many Londoners, the river was both a hazard and a convenience. Need to get rid of something fast? The Thames was always open for business. Children played on its banks, fishing out driftwood and, occasionally, things better left undisturbed. Some bathed in the water, which proved Darwin was right about natural selection. Water was drawn for laundry, industry, and horrifyingly, sometimes for drinking. No one connected the dots, at least not quickly enough. If you were caught short in public, the riverbank was the last refuge. Men dashed behind bushes, women disappeared behind discreet parasols, and anyone truly desperate simply squatted and hoped for a forgiving tide. Accidents happened. Shoes slipped, hands missed their grip, and every so often someone joined their own chamber pot on the journey to Greenwich. Efforts to clean the Thames were, for decades, little more than bucket brigades and wishful thinking. Engineers argued, lawmakers shrugged, and nature took its course. It wasn't until the stench reached the level of political crisis that real change began, ushered in by the construction of London's mighty sewers. Until then, the river was the city's shame, its secret, and its open secret, all at once. So next time you cross the Thames, remember, you're walking over centuries of history, tragedy, and things best not described before dinner. The river has seen it all, carried it all, and, in true Victorian fashion, managed to look picturesque while doing it. One especially hot summer, London's air becomes so foul that Parliament flees the city and newspapers offer scratch and sniff journalism. Never has a river inspired so much poetry and so many lawsuits. Let's begin with the weather. It's June 1858, and London is trapped under a heatwave. The sun, apparently out for revenge, bakes the cobblestones, boils the city's famously fragrant gutters, and, most importantly, turns the Thames into a steaming, malodorous broth. Every necessary house, chamber pot, and factory drain from miles around has dutifully contributed to the river's contents. Now, under the summer glare, the river bubbles and burps, releasing aromas so powerful that even the rats are looking for somewhere else to live. Londoners are a resilient lot. They've survived plagues, fire, and centuries of politicians. But this is different. People tie handkerchiefs over their faces. Gentlemen walk about with posies and ladies carry vinegar-soaked sponges. Street vendors hawk scented fans, and apothecaries do a brisk trade in respiratory elixirs, a fancy name for anything you can drink that temporarily numbs your sense of smell. In the city's offices, business grinds to a halt as workers lean out of windows, gasping for pockets of fresher air. The Great Stink, as it's soon called, unites London across class lines in shared olfactory trauma. Parliament, situated on the banks of the river, is ground zero. Lawmakers sit sweating at their desks, eyes streaming, handkerchiefs pressed to their faces, occasionally rising to shout, "Close the windows!" only to discover that closing the windows just makes the room hotter and the stench more concentrated. The government attempts all sorts of creative solutions. They hang curtains soaked in lime chloride, douse rooms in perfume, and even consider abandoning Westminster altogether for a summer home in the Scottish Highlands. Newspapers report on the crisis with the sort of dark humor only true suffering can inspire. Editorials include phrases like air thick as soup, breathable treacle, and an atmosphere to challenge the lungs of Hercules. Satirists have a field day, drawing cartoons of MPs fleeing Parliament, pursued by clouds of noxious gas with faces and top hats. The city's doctors issue dire warnings, and clergymen suggest the stench is divine punishment for some unnamed sin, possibly Parliament itself. And yet, amid the panic and the headlines, something miraculous happens. The government is finally forced to act. Years of hand-wringing and budget squabbles about public sanitation are swept aside by the very real fear that London will become uninhabitable if the problem isn't solved. Enter Joseph Bazalgette, a civil engineer with a vision and, one hopes, an impaired sense of smell. His plan? To construct an enormous system of sewers that would divert the city's waste far downstream, away from the Thames and away from noses that had suffered enough. The Great Stink, for all its misery, marks a turning point in urban history. In just a few years, Bazalgette's sewers transform London's health, reputation, and real estate values. The river begins to recover, fish return, and future generations marvel at the fact that their ancestors once considered the Thames both a trash can and a drinking fountain. So if you ever complain about the faint odor of your city's subway or a slow-draining sink, just remember, there was a summer when the world's greatest city nearly drowned in its own filth, and the only thing that saved it was the universal power of a really, really bad smell. How did Victorians cope? They doused themselves in perfume, clutched bouquets, and invented new ways to not inhale. Nosegay, it turns out, is not just a fun word, it's a survival strategy. Let's be honest, in Victorian London, smell was not just a fact of life, it was a daily adversary. You woke to the scent of chamber pots, walked through streets perfumed with horse manure, sewage, and coal smoke, and finished your day with the delicate notes of boiled cabbage, wet wool, and despair. In the ongoing war between human dignity and urban aroma, everyone was a combatant. If the city was a battlefield, then your nose was always on the front lines. The first weapon of choice? Perfume. Bottled, dabbed, sprinkled, or outright sloshed, scent was the universal shield against miasma, that invisible, villainous force believed to carry disease and ruin appetites. Ladies carried ornate flacons in their reticules. Gentlemen splashed cologne on their moustaches, and even children wore scented lockets around their necks. Entire shops specialized in foul air remedies, lavender, rosewater, and, for the truly desperate, vinegar. High society became an arms race of aroma, with people layering scents like a defensive wall. Jasmine over musk, citrus over civet, until the air around them became less a breeze and more a toxic cloud of competing florals. But perfume was not enough. Enter the nosegay, a small bouquet of flowers, herbs, and aromatic leaves, carefully arranged and tightly clutched, ready to be pressed to the nose at the first sign of trouble. A well-equipped Londoner never left home without one, especially in the summer. When the city's odours reached their artistic peak, some nosegays were simple, just a sprig of mint and a rose. Others were elaborate works of horticultural engineering, designed to be both beautiful and medicinal. The phrase "smelling salts" took on a new meaning. If you fainted, at least you'd wake up to the smell of rosemary instead of raw sewage. And then there were more desperate measures. People stuffed handkerchiefs with dried lavender or orange peel, held citrus peels under their nostrils, or even burned sugar on a spoon to create a momentary caramelized reprieve. In Parliament, MPs doused curtains in carbolic acid, a cleaning agent so pungent it replaced one problem with another: less river stench, more industrial chemical spill. Street vendors peddled odor eaters, mysterious powders to sprinkle on the pavement, promising to absorb more than just hope. For the working classes, who couldn't afford luxury scents or bouquets, coping strategies were more creative. Chewing on licorice root, rubbing vinegar on scarves, or simply walking faster became standard practice. The bravest, or most resigned, Londoners played the game of guess that smell, trying to identify the source as they hurried past, turning the city into a grotesque olfactory scavenger hunt. Ironically, the obsession with masking bad smells led to its own social dilemmas. Too much perfume was considered vulgar. An overly large nosegay signaled that you were either unwell or overly sensitive. In some circles, failing to react to a particularly egregious odor was seen as a mark of breeding. Smell blindness, the highest Victorian compliment. But beneath the laughter and the layered scents, there was real anxiety. Victorians believed foul air could kill, that invisible vapors carried cholera, typhus, and a dozen other invisible threats. In the end, the battle of the smells was a battle for survival. So next time you light a scented candle or wrinkle your nose on public transit, remember, it could be worse. You could be fighting for your life with nothing but a bouquet and your great-grandmother's eau de toilette. A trip to the bathroom isn't just risky for your dignity, it could be deadly. Diseases lurk in every puddle, and public health is whatever the opposite of public and health is. Let's set the record straight. For Victorians, the act of relieving oneself was a full-contact sport. Every visit to a public convenience was a roll of the dice, with the odds heavily weighted in favor of illness, humiliation, or at least a lingering sense of regret. You enter a public toilet, hopeful for relief, but what awaits you is a microbial haunted house. Dripping walls, floors with the consistency of porridge, and an odor that could double as anesthesia. Forget germ theory, most Victorians hadn't, and wouldn't, heard of it yet. If you asked the average Londoner about hygiene, you'd get a puzzled stare, a shrug, or perhaps a nervous cough. Now add to this volatile mix the fact that the city is teeming with invisible threats. Cholera, for example, was a regular visitor. Every few years, it swept through London with all the subtlety of a marching band, leaving panic, funerals, and finger-pointing in its wake. At first, nobody could figure out what caused it. Some said it was miasma, bad air rising from rotting matter. Others blamed the weather, foreigners, or the moon. Only a few stubborn doctors, led by Jon Snow, no, not the one from Game of Thrones, suspected that the water supply might be the culprit. Still, the main approach to public health was to hold your breath, pray, and, if you had money, escape to the countryside at the first sign of trouble. But cholera wasn't alone in the deadly lou's arsenal. Typhoid, dysentery, and a rotating cast of other stomach-churning ailments waited for anyone careless enough to touch a doorknob, breathe too deeply, or wash their hands in anything but gin. Toilets, public and private, were ground zero for outbreaks. When cesspits overflowed, or pipes burst, or the night soil men missed a pickup, disease spread faster than gossip at a garden party. For women and children, the risk was especially high. Smaller, weaker, and expected to make do, they were more likely to contract whatever was lurking in the communal privy. Doctors lectured about female frailty, but the real frailty was the city's plumbing. Hospitals overflowed with patients suffering from waterborne illnesses, and undertakers worked overtime during bad years. Newspapers published lists of clean wells and suspect neighborhoods, but for most, the advice came too late, and still, life went on. Londoners continued to queue for the penny toilet, to brave the necessary house. to do what must be done. People swapped folk remedies, chew on charcoal, carry a potato in your pocket, sprinkle carbolic acid on your boots. Most of these solutions accomplished nothing but provided a comforting illusion of control. In reality, every visit to the loo was a tiny act of courage, an acceptance that survival meant facing danger, day after day, and sometimes night after night. It wasn't until the link between contaminated water and cholera was firmly established, after decades of avoidable tragedy, that public health began to improve. Sewers were built, pipes laid, and the city slowly emerged from the shadow of its own waste. But the lesson lingered, even as indoor plumbing became the norm. The Victorian fear of the deadly loo never quite left the collective imagination. So next time you're annoyed by the line for a public restroom, remember, at least your greatest risk is boredom, not a bacterial surprise party. Thank history and Jon Snow for the upgrade. Did you know there were actual rules for how and where to relieve yourself? Ignore them, and you risk scandal, fines, or worst of all, a stern letter to the Times. Let's imagine you're a well-meaning Victorian in desperate need. Before you even think about entering a necessary house or heading for the closest privy, you must arm yourself with the era's strictest code, bathroom etiquette. Victorians took the act of going as seriously as a royal wedding or the rules of croquet. The toilet was a stage, and everyone was expected to perform with dignity, decorum, and above all, discretion. First, there's the business of queuing. Public facilities were few and far between, so a patient, silent line was expected outside every stall. No grumbling, no shuffling, and certainly no making eye contact with others in line. If you absolutely must speak, a polite cough or aim is the only acceptable greeting. If the person before you took too long, you simply waited and pretended you hadn't noticed the 15 minutes they spent in there reading last year's almanac. Upon entering, proper manners demanded you inspect the stall for traces of the previous occupant. Should you encounter a mess, a discreet exit was recommended. Never, ever draw attention to the crime scene. In some social circles, leaving a stall in poor condition was worse than being caught pilfering biscuits at tea. If there were no rags or paper, you were expected to improvise quietly, without complaint or visible distress. Then came the matter of sound. The Victorian ideal was near complete silence, both in word and deed. The necessary house was not a place for conversation or, heaven forbid, singing. Whispered gossip, giggles, and sighs were reserved for the street. Coughing or clearing one's throat could be forgiven, but anything louder was a breach of etiquette that could haunt your social standing for months. One ill-timed splash or a poorly timed flush was enough to inspire local legend. Timing, too, was everything. Lingering was strongly discouraged. The goal was to accomplish your task swiftly and gracefully, with just enough time to dab at your brow and exit looking serene. Anyone caught spending too long might face whispered speculation. Were they ill, embarrassed, composing poetry? All were equally scandalous. Mistakes, of course, happened. There are legendary tales of individuals entering the wrong facility, men's instead of ladies', or, in a moment of panic, mistaking a coal scuttle for a chamber pot. Such mishaps were rarely forgiven and often recounted at family dinners for years. The newspapers relished a good etiquette disaster, especially when it involved someone of note. Prominent banker involved in Privy mix-up was the kind of headline that sold out copies and fueled drawing room snickers. Children and foreigners naturally were granted some leniency, but only just. Parents drilled their offspring in the art of bathroom discretion from an early age, and etiquette guides devoted whole chapters to appropriate behavior in the house of necessity. Even the Queen, it was rumored, followed a strict ritual when traveling, bringing her own chamber pot and a trusted attendant to avoid public pitfalls. Above all, the golden rule was, never speak of what happened inside. If someone asked, you'd simply say you refreshed yourself or stepped out for a moment. To do otherwise risked not just embarrassment but social exile. So next time you catch yourself hesitating outside a restroom or worrying about a squeaky hinge, remember, you're standing in a long tradition of bathroom choreography, one slip away from infamy, and only ever a step from a stern letter to the editor. No shaman? No problem. Victorians used whatever was handy. Old newspapers, catalogues, and sometimes just their courage. The most popular, yesterday's headlines and last year's Sears Roebuck. Let's set aside our modern bathroom luxuries, quilted sheets, triple ply, aloe-infused rolls, and travel back to a world where wiping was more of an existential challenge than a comfort. In Victorian England, the question was, never do you have enough toilet paper. The question was, what even is toilet paper? Most had never seen it. The roll wouldn't enter mass production in Britain until the late 19th century. For everyone else, personal hygiene was an improvised performance. Start with the classics. If you lived in the country, your options were whatever nature provided. Leaves, grass, and handfuls of moss were the go-to for peasants and adventurous city dwellers alike. The wise knew to avoid stinging nettles and mysterious berries. If you were unlucky, you'd discover the hard way which foliage to trust. A botany lesson nobody ever forgot. Even among leaves, quality varied. A good broad dockleaf, one old proverb went, is worth its weight in gold. No one ever wrote poetry about the rest. In the city, you used what you could find. Newsprint became the staple of urban sanitation. The day's newspaper did double duty. First, as the vehicle of all the news you'd rather not hear. Then, as the solution to all the problems you'd rather not discuss. Political scandals and grain prices ended their journey where no editor dared imagine. Sometimes you'd get lucky, and a sheet of slightly glossy magazine would find its way into the necessary house. A small mercy in a world of rough options. And then there were the catalogues. Sears, Roebuck & Co. Catalogues, thick, absorbent, endlessly informative, became the gold standard in American outhouses and even made their way across the Atlantic. In Britain, the Littlewoods or Argos catalogues filled the gap for the enterprising shopper with poor timing. These catalogues promised a universe of consumer possibility on one page and instant relief on the next. Some people swore by the advertisements, others by the pages with less ink, and all lived in dread of the final, cardboard-thick back cover. But it wasn't just paper and plants. Scraps of cloth, squares of worn-out linen, or old rags did the trick, at least until laundry day, when someone inevitably realized what had been recycled. In desperate moments, some used corn cobs, don't ask, oyster shells, don't even think about it. Or, if you were truly innovative, a handful of sand. Not for the faint of heart. Did people worry about hygiene? Only in the sense that they worried about everything else. Vaguely, and with a resigned sigh. Doctors might lecture about the importance of cleanliness, but in a world where a bath was a monthly ordeal, wiping was more about survival than sparkle. Sometimes, you'd find a community necessary house equipped with a gomp stick or sponge on a handle, meant to be shared and rinsed between users. The less said about this, the better. Yet, there was camaraderie in discomfort. People swapped tips on the best materials, shared a laugh over the daily newsprint, and sometimes left editorial notes on the margins, turning the toilet into a venue for both relief and review. Victorian bathroom graffiti. This leaf is superior to the times. By the late 19th century, commercial toilet paper finally appeared, sold in boxes, not rolls, and often rougher than the news it replaced. Most people viewed it with suspicion, Was it too soft? Too decadent? Could it really be trusted? But slowly, the miracle of the white began to spread, and with it, a new era of comfort and cleanliness. So next time you reach for that soft, perforated luxury, remember, your ancestors faced the news with more than just their eyes. And sometimes, the headline really was too rough to handle. Enter the era of the flush toilet, or at least the first experiments. Most of them fail spectacularly. If you thought a clogged toilet was bad, imagine it powered by gravity, ignorance, and a little too much optimism. Let's start with the dream. For centuries, humans have yearned for a bathroom experience free from buckets, rags, and the ever-present aroma of defeat. The flush toilet was supposed to be the answer. A device so clever and modern, it would whisk away your problems with a single, triumphant pull of the chain. Early inventors imagined a world where dignity was restored, unpleasant chores were eliminated, and nobody had to shout warnings before emptying a chamber pot out the window. What could possibly go wrong? Quite a lot, as it turns out. The first attempts at a flushing toilet date back centuries. Sir John Harrington, a godson of Queen Elizabeth I, famously invented one in 1596. The Queen was reportedly unimpressed, and the invention languished for another 200 years, mostly because nobody wanted to be the first person to risk indoor plumbing. By the Victorian era, a new wave of engineers, tinkerers, and unwise property owners picked up the challenge. The result was a parade of innovation and chaos. Early flush toilets were marvels of engineering on paper, full of valves, levers, tanks, and instructions that required a PhD to decipher. Installation was an adventure. If you were rich, you could afford the latest water closet, a mysterious wooden box with a porcelain bowl, and a tank perched alarmingly high on the wall. Pull the chain, and, if all went well, water roared down, swirling your troubles away. If things didn't go well, you could flood your entire home, unleash geysers of questionable origin, or, in rare cases, blow out the downstairs ceiling. Flushing was as much an act of faith as science. Pipes rattled, joints leaked, and water pressure was a cruel and fickle god. In some houses, the flush only worked at certain times of day, usually just after your neighbour had finished using theirs. Early public toilets, installed in London for the Great Exhibition of 1851, attracted thousands of curious visitors eager to see the latest in sanitary progress. For a penny, you could marvel at the wonders of modern engineering and emerge with a story for the ages. Sometimes about the future, sometimes about unexpected indoor waterfalls. And then there were the failures. Toilets with traps that didn't trap. Pipes that funneled waste back into the kitchen sink. And tanks that simply exploded under the pressure of ambition. The world's first flushers quickly learned that getting rid of waste was one thing, making sure it stayed gone was another. Sewer gases, blockages, and backflow disasters gave rise to new professions: the plumber, the sanitary inspector, and the highly suspicious neighbour. Still, progress marched on. By the late Victorian period, the flush toilet was becoming a status symbol, proudly displayed in catalogues and guarded from curious children like a family heirloom. The middle classes were soon obsessed with the idea, willing to brave minor flooding for the dream of modernity. Flushing became a ritual, a performance, a symbol that you had arrived, both socially and, with luck, dry. Yet even as the flush toilet spread, not everyone trusted it. Some Victorians worried it was too extravagant, too French, or that it would weaken the constitution. Others simply preferred the tried and true chamber pot, skeptical that any invention could truly conquer the oldest problem in history. In the end, the flush toilet did change everything, eventually. But along the way, it changed wallpaper, ceilings, and the occasional family pet, too. Victorians were suspicious of everything, and public toilets were no exception. Stories of rats, ghosts, and mysterious disappearances abound. Don't look down, don't linger, and definitely don't make a wish. Let's descend into the dim, drafty world of Victorian public bathrooms, a place where the imagination ran as wild as the plumbing. It's one thing to dread the smell. It's quite another to believe the loo itself is haunted, cursed, or the favoured hunting ground of supernatural vermin. Yet, in a city prone to gossip, bad plumbing, and poorly lit alleys, the toilet became the centre of 1,000 urban legends, each more unsettling than the last. First, let's talk rats. Victorians genuinely feared the toilet rat, a beast as cunning as it was horrifying, rumoured to swim up pipes and appear at the worst possible moment. Newspapers ran lurid accounts of people being nipped in sensitive areas by rodents with the tenacity of tax collectors. Cartoonists drew pictures of terrified men leaping off toilets, trousers tangled around their ankles, pursued by an army of vengeful rats. Was it real? Very occasionally, yes. London's rat population rivaled its human one, and the early, untrapped flush toilets provided direct access from the city's underworld. But did that stop people from using the facilities? Absolutely not. A true Victorian preferred to risk rodent ambush over the humiliation of going in public view. Then there were the ghosts. Every neighbourhood had its own haunted privy, usually the scene of some unspeakable 18th century scandal or tragic misunderstanding involving candles and too much gin. Whispered tales warned children not to linger in the stall, lest the pale figure of Mad Sally reach through the wall, or the ghostly footsteps of old Albert shuffle up behind you, eager for a spectral chat. Even the bravest grown-ups hesitated to visit certain necessary houses after dark, muttering prayers or bringing a friend as insurance against the unknown. But supernatural paranoia didn't stop at ghosts and rats. Some believed toilets were portals, tiny swirling gateways for evil spirits and unkind fates. A chill on the seat? Surely a sign the devil himself had just paid a visit. A mysterious draught? The work of mischievous fairies, eager to play tricks on unsuspecting bladders. Dropping something in the loo was considered an ill omen. Retrieving it was a guaranteed way to invite misfortune. And, let's be honest, tetanus. Potty superstition even invaded the world of etiquette. People believed whistling in the privy was bad luck, potentially calling down spirits, rats, or, worse, a disapproving neighbour. It was said that discussing your business in public, or even thinking about the process for too long, could curse you with constipation, piles, or a tendency to marry beneath your station. Victorians, as a rule, did not wish one another good luck on a trip to the loo. If you returned unscathed, you were expected to act as if nothing unusual had happened. And if all this wasn't enough to fuel anxiety, there were rumours of people vanishing, never to return, simply swallowed up by malfunctioning plumbing or secret passages hidden beneath the city's streets. The necessary house was a liminal space, half public, half private, all anxiety. Modern bathrooms may have fewer rats, but some fears remain. The uneasy glance before you sit, the double check for shadows under the door, that instinct to hurry, just in case. So next time you flush and the lights flicker, remember, in Victorian times, that was just Tuesday. If you're upper class, you get to brag about your water closet. If you're everyone else, you get to read about it in magazines and resent your neighbour's indoor plumbing. Let's picture the scene. It's 1870, and you're attending a party at a townhouse so grand it has its own postman. After an hour of polite conversation and scandalously weak punch, you excuse yourself and are escorted, not to a drafty outhouse or a communal privy, but to a private indoor sanctuary, the water closet. You gaze upon it as if it's a holy relic, polished porcelain, a wooden seat polished to a shine, and, most impressive of all, a tank on the wall that promises, with a pull of the chain, to send everything away with a flourish. The entire experience is so genteel you half expect a footman to appear and offer you a scented towel. But, like all miracles, the water closet was reserved for the chosen few. Indoor plumbing was a status symbol, a badge of sophistication, and a not-so-subtle way of telling your friends, "My waste goes away faster than yours." The average working-class Londoner could only dream of such luxury, and most encountered the concept of a water closet only through rumours, magazine articles, and the complaints of their landlord, "No, Mrs. Gribble, you may not install one in the attic. The pipes would freeze, and the roof would collapse again." The first wave of water closets were more about showing off than real convenience. Victorian engineers and designers competed to create ever more elaborate contraptions, with porcelain basins painted with flowers, mahogany seats, and levers so intricate that guests had to ask for a demonstration. Manuals were printed, but no one wanted to admit they needed one. Servants were trained in the art of discreetly flushing, because nothing was more embarrassing than a loud, echoing whoosh in the middle of a dinner party. These early water closets had their quirks. Pipes froze in winter, tanks leaked in summer, and occasionally the whole mechanism would explode with the force of a minor earthquake, sending contents and dignity through several floors of the house. But for those with money, it was worth the risk. After all, who could resist the pleasure of using the latest sanitary marvel while lesser mortals still shuffled to the backyard, candle in hand, and prayed for a dry seat? Victorian magazines were filled with tips for the aspiring water closet owner. To avoid odour, ensure your closet is vented to the roof, not to the drawing room. Never use more than 2 pails of water per flush, unless the guests are French. Invite your neighbours over for tea, then casually mention your latest plumbing installation. Etiquette guides discreetly offered advice for navigating water closet mishaps at social gatherings, always with the goal of preserving face and keeping gossip to a minimum. For those who couldn't afford such luxuries, indoor plumbing became the stuff of envy, urban legend, and occasional outrage. The divide was clear. The upper crust had the water closet, while the rest of the city had buckets, rags, and a lifetime supply of resigned shrugs. Aspiring social climbers sometimes snuck into department stores to test the facilities, telling stories of their brief, forbidden encounter with porcelain perfection for years to come. By the end of the century, water closets began trickling down to the middle class, and soon, what was once a privilege became a possibility. But for a golden moment in history, having an indoor bathroom wasn't just about comfort. It was about class, pride, and flushing your troubles away in style. Victorian bathrooms are not private. Gossip swirls thicker than the fog on the Thames, and secrets are traded through thin wooden doors. Enter at your own risk. Let's picture you, a respectable Londoner, making your way into a public necessary house for a moment of solitude. But solitude is in short supply. As you settle onto the dubious wooden seat, you quickly realize you are not alone. The walls, paper thin and sometimes gapped, are portals through which all manner of whispers, sniffles, and nervous throat clearings echo. Welcome to the secret social network of the Victorian loo, where everyone's business, literal and metaphorical, is open for public consumption. While society insisted on discretion, necessity houses were social pressure cookers. Queues stretched out the door, and those waiting could hear every cough, mutter, or embarrassing misfire. In an era where conversation about bodily functions was taboo, the bathroom became the one place where silence spoke volumes. The most infamous stalls were known not for their cleanliness, but for the scandalous snippets overheard within. If you wanted to know who was courting whom, whose husband was staying out late, or what really happened at Lady Rigsby's garden party, you listened carefully while pretending to examine the graffiti on the wall. Sometimes, a necessary house became a full-blown confessional. Friends ducked in together, one keeping guard while the other aired grievances about bosses, lovers, or in-laws. Mothers scolded children for dawdling, only to realize too late that their neighbor in the next stall had overheard every word. Rival shopkeepers traded barbed comments across the partition, all while maintaining the fiction of polite society outside. Of course, some stalls became the stage for illicit rendezvous. Lovers exchanged hurried notes through the cracks. Black marketeers slipped packets of contraband beneath doors. The attendant, who'd seen it all, developed the uncanny ability to distinguish innocent gossip from high-stakes intrigue with a single raised eyebrow. If you spent too long inside, rumors swirled that you were up to something. Not just reading the newspaper, but perhaps negotiating a scandal or hiding from the law. Newspapers soon caught on. "Spies in the stall!" cried the headlines, stoking paranoia about foreign agents collecting state secrets from behind a thin door. Some local officials went so far as to install warning signs, "No whispering, and conversations will be reported to the police." Naturally, this only encouraged more secrecy and more creative methods of communication. Londoners became adept at eavesdropping without being caught, listening with one ear pressed to the wall and the other listening for the dreaded creak of the attendant's shoes. Rumors from the bathroom line moved faster than any telegram. A single overheard phrase could become the talk of the town by sunset, repeated with embellishments and wild speculation. "I heard it in the Privy" became both a warning and a badge of authenticity. After all, if it was worth risking the necessary house, it must be true. Politicians, clergymen, and socialites were all brought low by the humble bathroom stall, their secrets escaping in clouds of steam and laughter. Ironically, the public privy became the great equalizer. No matter how grand your title, everyone's secrets sounded the same when filtered through a wooden partition. Scandal didn't discriminate. In the end, the bathroom was where reputations were made, unmade, or simply flushed away. So next time you complain about the lack of privacy in a modern restroom, remember, the only thing thicker than the walls in a Victorian necessary house was the cloud of gossip that lingered long after you left. If you're a child in Victorian London, good luck. Public toilets are rare, terrifying, and often occupied by people you'd cross the street to avoid. Spoiler, most kids just don't make it in time. Let's start with the basics. The urge strikes, and you're in the middle of a bustling street. One hand clutching your mother's skirt, the other clutching your bladder for dear life. Modern children may whine about road trips, but you, Victorian child extraordinaire, face a bathroom gauntlet that would defeat even the bravest adult. Indoor plumbing is a dream, public toilets are a gamble, and your chamber pot at home is, frankly, miles away and likely already spoken for. You tug anxiously, whispering your need, and are met with the universal parental response. Hold it. Not so much a suggestion as a demand for superhuman bladder control. You might have a chance if you're a boy. After all, London is sprinkled with street urinals for gentlemen, or at least for those tall enough to reach. But for girls, the options are A. Wait, B. Develop nerves of steel, or C. Learn to run. On a rare lucky day, your mother might spot a necessary house and rush you towards salvation. But salvation, in this case, comes with a price. There's a line out the door. The attendant looks as forbidding as a headmistress. And the facility itself is, let's be honest, less than inspiring. The seat is too high, the floor is too wet, and the smell alone could knock out a pony. Every child in line does the same desperate shuffle, dancing from foot to foot, exchanging nervous glances as if preparing for battle. Privacy? A luxury. Stall doors, when they exist, don't reach the floor, leaving little legs and frantic feet visible to all. Sometimes, older kids are sent to stand guard, armed with nothing but a grim sense of duty and a hope that nobody peeks. For many, the fear of the public toilet outweighs even the urge to go. You hear stories from friends, rats in the shadows, haunted stalls, and old misses. Pritchard, who once yelled at a child so loudly that her hair turned white on the spot. Some brave souls make it through unscathed. Others have cautionary tales to last a lifetime. Unsurprisingly, most children resort to desperate measures. Alleyways become unofficial rest stops. Hedges, crates, and, in a pinch, a parent's coat can all serve as emergency cover. Victorian etiquette books strictly forbid such behavior. But children are the exception to every rule, and so are emergencies. Mothers apologize, fathers grumble, and city workers quietly pretend not to notice. Better out than in, as the saying goes, even if it means a hasty escape down a side street before the attendant appears. For working-class children, the challenge is doubled. Home might be a shared room in a crowded tenement, with a single outdoor privy guarded by older siblings and rival families. If you're late, you wait, and if you wait too long, you improvise. The city's alleyways bear silent witness to the plight of Victorian youth. Quick decisions, accidental puddles, and the hope that nobody saw. Despite the embarrassment, there's a strange camaraderie. Children swap tips, tell horror stories, and invent games to pass the time in line. The bathroom gauntlet becomes a rite of passage, proof of resilience and creative problem-solving. By adulthood, surviving Victorian toilets is a badge of honor, an unspoken credential. So next time a child complains about waiting for a modern bathroom, just smile and remember, it could be worse. They could be facing the London loo gauntlet, with only a brave heart and a strong bladder to defend them. Privy accidents are alarmingly common. Every Londoner knows someone who fell in. Nobody knows what happened next, and everyone is quietly afraid it will be them. Let's set the scene. It's the middle of the night, the wind is howling, and you're braving the trip to the backyard privy, lantern in hand, hope in your heart, and dread in your bowels. Victorian outhouses were notorious contraptions, rickety wooden boxes perched over deep, dark pits that promised anonymity for your waste and adventure for anyone unlucky enough to misjudge their footing. The danger was ever present. One misplaced step, a rotting plank, or the slip of a muddy shoe, and down you'd go, into the abyss. Children were warned with terrifying bedtime stories. Mind the hole or you'll end up in the night soil. It was less of a warning, more of a prophecy. Adults weren't immune either. Every neighborhood had its tale of the unfortunate uncle, the tipsy neighbor, or the unlucky servant who vanished with a splash and emerged hours later, forever changed. Privy Falls became a grim but popular icebreaker at parties, the stuff of whispered gossip and snorting laughter. And it wasn't just the fall that was frightening. Once down there, what awaited you? Legends abounded. Some swore the bottom of the privy pit was alive, with rats, lost jewelry, and even the spirits of those who had gone before. The bravest among you might attempt a rescue, but more often, the victim was left to contemplate their life choices until the family could assemble a rescue party and a very, very long ladder. Public necessary houses offered little improvement. Communal pits filled faster than expected, sometimes rising up to meet the unwary from below. Attendants did their best to warn of structural weakness. But the city's motto seemed to be use at your own risk. If you were lucky, you escaped with a muddy boot and a story to tell. If not, your reputation and your clothes would never quite recover. To add insult to injury, some believed privy pits had a mind of their own. Urban legends told of creatures living below, giant rats, vengeful spirits, or even entire colonies of people who, having fallen in, decided it was easier to stay. Parents used these stories to keep children in line. Clean your room, or you'll end up like Cousin Tommy, still down there with the moles. Whether or not anyone believed these tales, everyone checked twice before sitting. Of course, privy pitfalls were more than just folklore. Newspapers occasionally ran stories of real tragedies. Buildings collapsing into overflowing cesspits, courtyards caving in, and the odd criminal escaping through the city's labyrinthine waste tunnels. Engineers, when they finally got around to inspecting the old pits, marveled at the sheer amount of, well, everything lurking beneath the city's surface. Some joked that London sat on a foundation of ancient secrets, held together only by stubbornness and wishful thinking. Despite the dangers, privies remained essential, used by everyone from pauper to parliamentarian. A successful trip to the outhouse was considered a small victory, an everyday triumph over both nature and Victorian engineering. People developed superstitions, knocking on the door, checking the floorboards, and never, ever using the last stall in the row. The wise learned to move quickly, to balance carefully, and to keep their boots tightly laced. So next time you settle onto a modern, porcelain throne, take a moment to appreciate the absence of bottomless pits and Victorian nightmares. Your ancestors survived the privy pitfall, one careful step at a time. Craving cleanliness? Try a public bath, an experiment in community hygiene, contagious diseases, and seeing your neighbors with their guard, and everything else, down. Let's begin with the basics. You, a grime-encrusted Victorian, long for something more than a quick splash from the wash basin or the occasional encounter with rain. But bathing at home is a logistical nightmare. Firewood is expensive, water is heavy, and your tub, if you have one, doubles as a storage bin for onions, old shoes, or a spare chicken. Enter the public bathhouse, the city's answer to filth and a magnet for the bold, the desperate, and the truly courageous. You make your way to the local bathhouse, coins clutched in hand and a prayer on your lips. The building looms before you, its steamy windows promising relief and awkward encounters. Inside, the noise is overwhelming, a symphony of splashing, coughing, and the relentless chatter of neighbors discovering new places to gossip. Rows of tubs line the walls, separated by thin screens or, in less reputable establishments, by nothing at all. Privacy, much like hot water, is strictly rationed. A friendly, or bored, attendant collects your payment and gestures toward a vacant tub. Try to be quick, he says, as a line of impatient customers forms behind you. You strip down in a drafty corner, conscious of both your dignity and the fact that the city's coldest breeze always finds its way inside. Modesty is abandoned alongside your boots. The water is warm at first, a small miracle. But as you settle in, the reality sets in. You're not the first bather in this tub today, or the fifth. Soap is handed out sparingly, as if it's made of gold. Towels are communal and suspiciously damp. Children splash, old men snore, and mothers shout at anyone who looks like they might be enjoying themselves too much. If you're feeling flush, you can pay extra for a private cubicle, which means the curtain mostly closes and the attendant only occasionally peeks inside to check if you're still alive. But the real terror of the public bath isn't the lack of privacy or the questionable hygiene, it's the company. Your neighbors, co-workers, and local shopkeepers are all here, reduced to their most vulnerable, slippery selves. You exchange awkward nods and try not to notice the scar on Mrs. Higginbottom's knee. or Mr. Taylor's impressive collection of moles. Conversation is unavoidable. People discuss politics, prices, and, inevitably, who is using too much soap. If you were hoping to keep your secrets, forget it. The bathhouse is a breeding ground for gossip more infectious than any microbe lurking in the water, and microbes do lurk. Every bath is a gamble. Ringworm, lice, and mysterious rashes are frequent souvenirs. Doctors recommend a quick rinse in carbolic acid afterward, just to be safe. Some regulars swear by their own methods: lemon juice, vinegar, or not bathing at all. For the particularly paranoid, the safest route is to scrub quickly and pray you don't catch anything that requires an embarrassing explanation at the apothecary. Despite the risks, public baths are a social equalizer. Rich and poor, young and old, all stripped of their defenses and layered grime. The lucky few leave feeling refreshed. The rest leave vowing never to return until next month, when even the bravest admit defeat. So next time you luxuriate in your private shower, think of the Victorians. Cleaner, yes, but never quite clean, and always surrounded by the sound of other people's wet nightmares. London's police have their hands full, and so do its pickpockets. The public toilet is a den of vice, petty theft, and occasional indecent exposure. Let's talk about law and order. Victorian style. Imagine you're caught short in the middle of Oxford Street, duck into the nearest public convenience, and immediately encounter the seedy underbelly of the city's sanitation system. Public toilets were designed to bring dignity and hygiene to the masses, but what they mostly brought was trouble. For every penny dropped in the slot, there seemed to be another rule to break, another fine to pay, and another story for the magistrate's ledger. Victorian society had a dizzying number of rules about public conduct, and the necessary house was no exception. Pee in the wrong place? Fine. Use the men's when you're not a man? Double fine, and a possible trip to the police station. Skip out on the fee, or slip past the attendant without paying. Prepare for public shaming, or, if you're unlucky, a court appearance. Laws against public indecency were as vague as they were strict, and the newspapers delighted in reporting the misadventures of those who failed to keep their wits or their trousers about them. Some cases were ridiculous. One poor soul was famously fined for loitering with intent to relieve himself, a charge that could apply to half the city on any given afternoon. Another, a notorious prankster, was arrested for replacing a toilet supply of rags with the morning's edition of the Times, resulting in general confusion and outrage among the city's more sensitive readers. A group of women, frustrated by the lack of facilities, staged a protest by marching into the men's necessary house and refusing to leave, causing a scandal that rippled through polite society and several letters to the editor. But the necessary house was also a haven for more serious offenders. Pickpockets and thieves plied their trade in crowded loos, using distraction and close quarters to relieve patrons of more than just their worries. The dark corners and flimsy partitions became staging grounds for covert deals, gambling, black market goods, and even the exchange of classified information. Some attendants, not above a little extra income, ran their own side businesses, selling preferred access or discreetly overlooking minor infractions for the right price. Indecency was the big fear. Moral reformers warned of immoral acts committed behind closed doors, and the police were often dispatched to root out vice. Scandal erupted when a well-known politician was discovered in a state of undress, engaged in vigorous debate with an unidentified companion. Magistrates handed out fines and lectures, while newspapers had a field day inventing new euphemisms for activities better left unreported. Children, as always, were inventive. With little money but lots of time, they became experts at sneaking into pay toilets, climbing over doors, wriggling under stalls, or distracting attendants with elaborate tales of lost puppies. Each successful mission was a victory against both authority and bladder. Despite the chaos, the law's relationship with the loo was mostly reactive, a never-ending game of cat and mouse. As quickly as one crime was addressed, another popped up to take its place. The city tried everything: better lighting, tougher attendants, even occasional police patrols through the stalls. Yet, for every new rule, Londoners found new ways to bend, break, or laugh at it. So next time you flush away your worries in peace, be grateful. In Victorian London, even a trip to the loo could land you in the headlines, the court, or, if you were lucky, just out a penny and a good story. Meet the inventors and engineers who try to fix the unfixable. Sewer tours become all the rage. The real hero? Joseph Bazalgette, a man with a plan, and, presumably, no sense of smell. Let's talk about Victorian progress, a strange mixture of blind optimism and stubborn ingenuity, usually inspired by a crisis nobody could ignore. By the mid-19th century, London's air was so thick with the bouquet of waste, coal, smoke, and disappointment that something had to be done. Enter the city's civil engineers, armed with blueprints, stiff upper lips, and a terrifying willingness to crawl beneath the city in the name of science. At the heart of this epic was Joseph Bazalgette, a man with the jawline of a hero and the patience of a saint. Bazalgette looked at the Thames, London's open sewer, and saw not just a river of nightmares, but an opportunity. His plan was simple in theory: build massive, underground tunnels to whisk away the city's waste before it could resurface in Parliament or anyone's drinking water. In practice, it was an engineering puzzle involving hundreds of miles of new sewers, miles of new pipes, and the city's entire population quietly hoping it would all work. Construction was an adventure in itself. Teams of workers, known as navvies, dug beneath the streets, sometimes through solid clay, sometimes through less pleasant strata. Newspaper reports chronicled their bravery, the occasional cave-in, and the mysteries they uncovered. Fossilized rats, lost jewelry, ancient Roman sandals, and, once, what was described only as an object of unspeakable origin. Meanwhile, Londoners above wondered if the sewers would ever be finished, or if everyone would simply learn to breathe through their mouths forever. The grand opening of Bazalgette's sewer system was an event. Politicians, journalists, and even Queen Victoria herself were given tours, underground, by boat, through freshly washed tunnels. Sewer tourism became fashionable for a season. Society columns published breathless accounts. It is remarkable what one sees, and more remarkable what one smells, in the depths below. For the first time, Londoners began to believe that their city might be conquerable, if not by nature, then at least by clever plumbing. The new sewers did more than keep the streets clean. They helped stop cholera, reduced the number of midnight pitfall accidents, and made it possible for the water closet to become a true symbol of modernity. Bazalgette himself was lauded as a public health savior, an unlikely celebrity for a man whose main job involved calculating the flow rate of other people's waste. Monuments were erected, songs were written, engineers everywhere wept with envy, but not everything was solved overnight. The city's waste still needed somewhere to go, and riverside residents grumbled as effluent was simply relocated further downstream. Progress, it seemed, was a movable feast. Critics predicted disaster, but Bazalgette, undeterred, quietly made his pipes twice as wide as current needs. An act of foresight that saved the city a century of misery. In the end, Victorian engineering didn't just make London cleaner. It made it possible for millions to live in close quarters without constant fear of the deadly loo. The sewers became a symbol, not just of scientific progress, but but of what could be accomplished when people stopped arguing and started digging. So next time you flush, spare a thought for the men beneath your feet, the marvels of modern plumbing, and the unsung heroes who believed that no problem, no matter how smelly, was too big to fix. After a day navigating the loos, you have a new appreciation for running water, flush toilets, and the miracle of air freshener. The only souvenir you take home? PTSD, public toilet smell disorder. Let's pause and tally the score. You've endured the great stink, dodged a stampede of night soil men, and negotiated with a mop-wielding attendant for the last dry square of newsprint. You've waited in lines longer than the queue for Hamilton tickets, and, at some point, you may have accidentally started a conversation through a stall wall, an experience from which neither of you will ever fully recover. Congratulations! You are now, by Victorian standards, an Olympic-caliber survivor. What does a day in the Victorian bathroom gauntlet teach you? First, that comfort is relative. After squatting over a necessary house on a windy night, modern plumbing feels like a Nobel Prize-winning invention. Hot water, padded seats, private doors, these are gifts you didn't know to appreciate until you've juggled a candle, a chamber pot, and your dignity, all before sunrise. The next time you flush, take a moment of silence for your ancestors, who lived in constant fear of splinters, rats, and the ever-present risk of falling into history. Second, hygiene is a team sport. In the Victorian era, you didn't just battle grime alone, you shared it with family, neighbours, and the entire block. Bathhouses, communal privies, and even public loos were places of social and bacterial exchange. You learned to trust strangers with your secrets, your soap, and occasionally your balance. Modern germaphobes might cringe, but for Victorians, community was built in the bath line, and resilience was forged in the face of every new rash. Third, patience is more than a virtue. It's a necessity. When one attendant, 2 lines, and 3 broken locks stand between you and relief, you learn the fine art of waiting. Victorians mastered the bathroom queue long before fast food drive-thrus or the DMV. Next time you stand in a restroom line at the cinema, remember, at least no one is charging you by the minute, and the floor isn't a science experiment. Fourth, the British talent for quiet suffering reached its pinnacle in the Privy. If you've ever wondered how a nation endured rationing, fog, and endless small talk about the weather, consider their bathroom experience. Victorians suffered the indignities of cold seats, dubious paper, and ghostly drafts without complaint. In fact, they invented a whole genre of understated bathroom humor, quips, and graffiti meant to lighten the mood, or at least distract you from the aroma. Most of all, the Victorian bathroom teaches gratitude, not just for plumbing but for every modern luxury you take for granted. Doors that lock, drains that work, towels that don't smell of mildew and regret. It's a reminder that even the most basic acts of comfort are the result of generations of struggle, invention, and a stubborn refusal to accept the status quo or the stench. So tonight, as you bask in the glow of your clean, private bathroom, maybe light an extra candle for Basil Jet, the unknown chamber pot emptier, and every Victorian who faced the Privy pitfall and lived to tell the tale. Remember, they walked, squatted, and shuffled so you could run, straight to the nearest, spotless loo. And if you ever catch yourself complaining about a public bathroom, just be glad you're not holding a penny, a prayer, and your breath, hoping this time you'll make it out dry. Public bathrooms aren't free for all. Sometimes you need to track down the mythical bathroom key, usually attached to something large and humiliating, like a cricket bat or an iron bar. It ensures you parade your shame through the crowd for everyone to see. It's the walk of bladdered defeat. Let's set the scene. You're in a bustling railway station, stomach rumbling with nerves, bladder knocking at the door of propriety. You spot a public toilet, only to find the entrance locked. Salvation, it turns out, requires a key. A key, not just any key, but a Victorian artifact built less for convenience and more as an obstacle course for the desperate. This is no ordinary piece of brass. The key is chained to a billiard cue, a length of iron pipe, or, in particularly creative establishments, a giant wooden spoon. The purpose is simple but cruel, to ensure you don't accidentally forget to return the key. The effect, however, is something between a walk of shame and a comedy routine. Everyone in the lobby watches as you approach the attendant and request access. They hand you the contraption with the sort of theatrical flourish normally reserved for courtroom evidence or cursed relics. If you're lucky, the chain is just long enough for a brisk stroll. If not, you must carry your burden high, weaving between suitcases, suspicious stares, and the unspoken sympathy of fellow travelers. The humiliation isn't over yet. The key is almost always sticky, damp, or mysteriously warm. No one ever cleans it. Why would they? Returning the key is a silent pact among strangers. You take it as you find it, avoid eye contact, and do not, under any circumstances, sniff your hand afterward. At best, it smells of brass and disinfectant. At worst, it's a tangible reminder of everyone who came before you. Victorian etiquette guides barely touched on the subject, which is saying something, considering these books included entire chapters on how to sit, stand, and exhale politely. Instead, the bathroom key became a subject of hushed gossip, swapped tips, and survival strategies. Some clever souls attempted to fashion their own, hoping to bypass the indignity. Others bribed attendants, offering a penny for the privilege of misplacing the key and skipping the parade altogether. This, naturally, led to the rise of the rogue key, illicit copies kept by cunning locals who sometimes lent them out for a small fee, turning bathroom desperation into a cottage industry. The key system was also a rich target for pranksters. Legend tells of a group of boys who once swapped the key with a sausage on a string, leaving one unfortunate traveler frantically jiggling meat at the door. Others, in moments of mischief or frustration, flung the key into the nearest hedge or pond, sparking bathroom hunts worthy of Sherlock Holmes. For women, the challenge doubled. Many ladies' conveniences had separate keys, sometimes kept in a locked drawer, requiring negotiation with a suspicious attendant. Woe betide the woman who needed to go in a hurry. Access might involve a committee, a waiting list, or a note from her mother. Despite all this, the bathroom key endured for decades. It was an equalizer. Rich or poor, posh or scruffy, you carried your need for all to see. Its legacy lingers in modern petrol stations and cafes, where the bathroom key is still attached to absurdly large tokens, plastic paddles, or even rubber chickens. So next time you find yourself parading through a crowd, bathroom key in hand, take comfort. You're part of a proud tradition of public humiliation. And, with luck, the queue will be shorter on your return. Victorian bathrooms, not just for biological business, but marketing too. Every flat surface is covered in handbills for miracle soaps, hair tonics, and digestive elixirs promising relief from everything but the stench. The walls tell a story, mostly of products you shouldn't trust near your body. Let's step inside a London necessary house in the 1880s. It's not a sanctuary, it's an advertising wonderland. The wooden stall door before you is plastered with handbills and broadsides, each more confident than the last. Dr. Bramble's bilious tonic, for digestion, nerves, and mysterious fainting. Try McDougall's effervescent teeth powder, whiten, brighten, and knock out a rat at 20 paces. In the public loo, privacy is an illusion and targeted marketing is an early Victorian specialty. This is a captive audience like no other. After all, if you're here, you have a few moments to kill and nothing else to look at but the walls, the door and your shoes, which you'll want to disinfect later. The advertisers know their crowd. Most ads promise quick cures for the city's endless ailments: rheumatism, gout, melancholy of the bowels, hair loss, or the embarrassment of halitosis. Some handbills are for medicinal snuff, a mixture of dubious herbs guaranteed to clear your sinuses, frighten away evil spirits, or possibly both. Soap is the star of the bathroom marketing world. Every surface shouts the virtues of Hargreaves' hygienic lather, Lady Gold's lavender cleanser, or Mr. Pickering's patent scouring cake. Each promises to banish filth, shame, and, for a modest surcharge, the memory of using a public toilet at all. Some soaps are so strongly scented that merely reading the ad makes your eyes water. Miracle tonics and elixirs are never far behind. These bottles, advertised in glowing prose, claim to restore vigor, stimulate digestion, or revitalize the humors. Ingredients? Not listed. The effects? Questionable. The guarantee? Ask your local undertaker if unsatisfied. Some brands market themselves with jingles and poems. Take McTavish's Tummy Tonic. Gentle on the stomach, fierce on the fumes. Side effects not listed, but stories abound. But not all ads are for personal improvement. The public loo is also prime real estate for lost cat posters, job offers, and handwritten notes advertising the services of Mrs. Dabble, discreet midwife, or Mr. Grigg, rat catcher, confidential. Sometimes you spot political pamphlets wedged between soap ads and discount ear trumpets, making your bathroom break a crash course in local politics. Vote Biddlecombe, he's tough on crime and soft on soap scum. For the curious, the bathroom is more than a place of necessity. It's a reading room and rumour mill, with entire novels unfolding on the back of a stall door. Cynical Londoners quickly learned to spot the difference between reputable brands and entrepreneurial scams. Some necessary houses employed ad scrapers, tasked with removing expired bills and covering up messages left by pranksters. For a good time, try Mrs. Endicott's laxative lozenges. A well-placed ad could make or break a business, or at least distract you from your immediate predicament. Yet, for all the noise and bluster, these bathroom ads did serve a purpose. They provided hope, or, at the very least, entertainment, when you needed it most. If you couldn't escape the smell, at least you could dream of a life where a single soap could wash away every Victorian woe. So, next time you're tempted by a too-good-to-be-true bathroom ad, remember, the Victorians survived on hope, humour, and just enough skepticism to avoid drinking the tonic water. Even the bravest Victorians fear certain toilets after dark. Tales swirl of spectral flushes, ghostly groans, and the vengeful spirit of a woman who just wanted a little privacy. Enter if you dare. Just don't expect to come out with your dignity or your soul intact. Let's dim the gaslight and step quietly into the shadowy side of the Victorian necessary house. It's midnight. The streets are cloaked in fog, and the Privy stands in the back garden, lonely and ominous. Every child, and more than a few adults, knows to hurry if they must visit after dark, lest they meet the infamous lavatory lady or old Grim, the Privy Ghoul, said to rise from the depths every Halloween. Ghost stories were not just for hearths and bedrooms. In a city as old and densely packed as London, even the bathrooms were haunted. The tales were endless. Some spoke of the grey spectre of Fleet Street, a restless office clerk doomed to eternally wander the public stalls. eternally seeking a free seat. Others whispered of Soggy Sally, a dripping apparition in a water-stained dress, who appeared if you tried to sneak in without paying the penny fee. A chill in the stall, an unexplained draft, or a door creaking open by itself was enough to set imaginations racing. If you believed the rumors, every necessary house had its ghost. Many claimed to have heard the sound of phantom footsteps, or the whisper of silk skirts in empty stalls. Some even reported the ghostly echo of a toilet chain pulled by invisible hands, or the heart-stopping gurgle of a flush from an unoccupied cubicle. And of course, there was the classic tale of the haunted tank, a water closet that flushed itself, spewing water and shrieks in equal measure, usually in the dead of night or when a local politician was in residence. For children, these stories were both warning and entertainment. Parents, especially mothers weary of midnight chaperoning, used them as cautionary tales. Don't dawdle, or the lavatory lady will catch you, was more effective than any bedtime threat. Siblings plotted elaborate pranks, banging on the stall door or dropping pebbles down the pipe at just the right moment, convinced that a single scare would be enough to cement lifelong bladder control. Superstitions abounded. You must never look into the privy pit at midnight, lest you see your own fate reflected, or worse, someone else's. If you whistled in the necessary house, you risked calling up spirits. And if you entered a public stall and found a daisy on the seat, folklore said you must leave at once, or be cursed with an endless need for the rest of the night. Some ghosts were benign, even helpful. There were stories of the gentleman in tweed, who rattled pipes to warn of leaks, or the maid of the mop, who kindly left fresh newspaper behind for the next visitor. But most tales ended with a cold shiver, a missing shoe, or a vow to never, ever use the necessary house alone after dark. Of course, modern plumbing eventually banished most of these spectres, at least to the attic or the back pages of family lore. But even today, there's something about a lonely bathroom at night, the flicker of a light bulb, or the unexplained flush that can send a Victorian-style chill up your spine. So next time you use the loo after midnight, check behind the door, tip your hat to Soggy Sally, and, if you hear a phantom flush, just hope the ghost is in a good mood. Introducing the sanitary inspector, part detective, part martyr, all knows. With a lantern and a clipboard, they descend into the depths to wage war against overflowing privies, rogue rats, and the eternal optimism of the out-of-order sign. Their reward, a new understanding of suffering. Let's meet your average Victorian sanitary inspector, the unsung hero, or occasionally public enemy, of the bathroom battleground. Picture them at dawn, starched collar, heavy boots, and a mustache waxed into submission, carrying a battered notebook and the haunted eyes of someone who's seen too much. While doctors and engineers get the glory, it's the inspector who wades into the real action, unclogging the pipes of progress, one disgusting surprise at a time. Their mission? Keep the city's toilets, cesspits, and public conveniences in a state that could be generously described as barely tolerable. Each day begins with a list of complaints from residents, businesses, and occasionally the Queen. There are reports of blockages, mysterious puddles, and rats so bold they answer to nicknames. It's the inspector's job to follow the scent, usually quite literally, and confront whatever horror awaits behind the next stall door. The tools of the trade are simple but grim: a lantern for peering into dim recesses, a sturdy stick for prodding suspicious mounds, a bottle of carbolic acid for heroic acts of disinfection, and a notebook for sketching out flow diagrams, or, more often, doodling morose cartoons as a coping mechanism. A handkerchief doused in lavender is the only real defense against defeat. Some days the battle is routine. Inspect the local necessary house. Floors mopped, questionable. Supplies restocked, almost buckets emptied, fingers crossed. Give the attendant a knowing nod. scribble adequate in the report, and move on. But on other days, it's full-scale crisis. A privy collapses, a sewer backs up into the bakery next door, or the city's most fashionable water closet develops a leak with the timing of a Shakespearean tragedy. On those days, the sanitary inspector becomes an unlikely hero, organizing evacuations, summoning night soil men, and issuing stern warnings to anyone who tries to fix it themselves with a broom. It's not all plumbing and pestilence. The inspector's social role is part gossip, part judge. They mediate disputes between neighbors. Your pig is not a suitable bathroom companion, arbitrate over who caused what leak, and occasionally deliver awkward lectures to children caught launching illicit objects into the pit. The most creative inspectors developed their own code of honor. Never show fear. Always trust your boots, and, above all, never touch anything with your bare hands. For all their labors, sanitary inspectors rarely receive thanks. Some are mocked, others feared, and a few, those with the strongest stomachs, become local legends. The boldest inspectors even lead public tours of the city's new sewers, inviting dignitaries to admire the wonders of modern sanitation, while quietly betting on who will faint first. Despite the hardships, their work mattered. Inspectors were the thin, lavender-scented line between the city and disaster. They spotted outbreaks before doctors did, pressed for repairs, and sometimes, miraculously, improved public health. Without them, even Joseph Bazalgette's greatest pipes would have gone to ruin. So, next time you see an out-of-order sign and wonder who answers the call, spare a grateful thought for the sanitary inspector, guardian of the drain, defender of the public's nose, and the only one brave enough to knock before entering. Stuck in the queue or contemplating your choices on the throne, you might turn to the Victorian version of bathroom reading, everything from scandal sheets to lurid serials. Some say Dickens wrote his best chapters with one hand on his nose. Others just hope the next page isn't already used. Let's face it, a trip to the Victorian necessary house wasn't exactly a swift affair. Whether you were waiting for a stall to become available, or simply taking your time on a chilly seat, there was ample opportunity for the mind to wander. For many, the solution was simple, reading material of any kind. The public bathroom quickly evolved from a chamber of horrors to a chamber of very questionable enlightenment. At first, literature in the loo was purely accidental. Newspapers, handbills, and political pamphlets found their way to the Privy as recycled wipers. The Times, yesterday's penny dreadful, or an old seed catalogue, might be hanging from a rusty nail by a length of twine. Users would carefully tear off a square, one for business, one for news, and, if lucky, a third for posterity. Margins became the bathroom's own editorial page, with readers leaving commentary, corrections, or the odd limerick for the next visitor. The ink runs, but so do I was a favorite signature. Before long, a culture developed. Savvy entrepreneurs recognized that a captive audience, literally seated and unable to escape, was ripe for engagement. Lavatory literature was born. Broadsides appeared, printed specifically for the loo. Short stories, jokes, useful facts, and, on more optimistic days, self-improvement advice. One notorious pamphlet, 10 Habits of Highly Effective Privy-Goers, promised to change your life in 3 paragraphs or less. But not all bathroom reading was so high-minded. For every uplifting fable, there were a dozen cheap serials, often as salacious as possible. Tales of highwaymen, haunted castles, and romantic intrigue became staples of the necessary house, giving readers something to ponder besides the damp. Some necessary houses even advertised the presence of reading materials provided, a rare luxury in a world where privacy was at a premium. There were dangers, of course. Not every printed page in the Privy was clean. Ink smeared, pages tore, and more than one reader learned the hard way not to get too attached to a particular chapter. Woe to anyone who reached for the next page, only to find it missing, or worse, repurposed. The most tragic souls tried to keep a favorite magazine hidden behind a loose board, only for it to be discovered and sacrificed to necessity. Reading in the loo was also a social activity. Children gathered to read adventure stories aloud, giggling between warnings from their mothers not to linger. Friends swapped tales, neighbours shared scandalous poems, and even the most stoic Victorians might pause to chuckle at a well-placed joke. Lavatory graffiti flourished, witty, philosophical, sometimes profound, always slightly damp. Of course, as indoor plumbing improved and the world sped up, the tradition began to fade. Books returned to bookshelves, magazines found a home by the fireside, and the bathroom became, once again, a place of business, not pleasure. But the legacy lingers. The next time you spot a magazine basket by the toilet or scroll your phone while waiting your turn, remember, you're part of a tradition as old as plumbing itself. So next time you settle in for a little me time, be grateful for fresh pages, dry hands, and the simple joy of not having to share your Dickens with a desperate stranger. So here we are, at the end of our long, harrowing, and deeply aromatic journey through the public bathrooms of Victorian England. You've survived a day where the bravest act isn't storming a battlefield, but simply braving the loo with your shoes and soul intact. You've held your breath through the great stink, navigated the mysteries of the penny toilet, and perhaps, for a brief moment, considered what it would be like to barter for a square of yesterday's newspaper. You've seen men duel over urinals, ladies pray for privacy, and entire neighbourhoods bond over the communal trauma of a public bath. Somewhere in there, you may have developed a spiritual connection to Joseph Bazalgette, patron saint of modern plumbing, and unappreciated noses everywhere. It's easy to laugh at how truly, magnificently filthy these public bathrooms were. But every night soilman, every weary attendant, every person who managed to survive the Victorian necessary house, did so with a kind of stubborn, unglamorous courage. In a city where even the air was a hazard, the ability to keep calm and carry on, sometimes with a posy pressed firmly to one's face, was a form of everyday heroism. They didn't have flush toilets, hot water, or even the hope of a quiet moment alone, but they endured, complained creatively, and, against all odds, lived to tell the tale, usually at someone else's expense. So tonight, as you drift off in your clean, private bed with fresh sheets and a bathroom just a few steps away, maybe send a little gratitude backward through time. Remember, you are descended from people who survived cholera, communal loose, and plumbing that could kill you before breakfast. They found humor, resilience, and the will to push for something better, even when better just meant fewer rats in the Privy. History is full of discomfort, disaster, and the constant threat of embarrassment. But it's also proof that humans are endlessly creative, occasionally hygienic, and deeply, wonderfully ridiculous. Rest easy, you've survived the great Victorian public bathroom adventure. The only thing left to do now is enjoy the luxury of a midnight bathroom trip. Flush, and know for certain you're not being haunted by the ghost of a disappointed sanitary inspector. Good night. And may your dreams be free of lineups, pennies, and the scent of progress.